Welcome to another episode of Changing GameDev Life, a podcast where we interview folks working in the game industry and ask them how they got there and who have helped them along the way. We focus on interviewing people who may break the historical mold of who is in games.
This podcast is for anyone who's interested in the soft and squishy human parts of getting into games work and how to make it better.
I'm Pejman. I'm a professor at Ontario Tech. I study games and user experience.
And I'm Jen. I'm a sociologist at the University of Waterloo's Game Institute. I mostly work with game devs and aspiring devs to understand who gets to make games as a career and why people leave it.
And today our guest is Samantha Stahlke. We wanted to talk to Samantha about her journey into the game industry and her experience on the academic world. And for a full disclosure, I know Samantha for now around 10 years. We work with each other in many different capacities, from a collaborator, from co-author, from a student supervisor relationship, and also a friend. I'm so happy to have Samantha here with us, and I'm so excited to hear her story. So to get us started, Samantha, how about you tell us what do you do these days and how it's related to games and what does your day-to-day life look like?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Glad to be here. Never been on a podcast before. This is very exciting. I'm Samantha. I am a game artist at Jam City, and I am officially employed by the Toronto office, but I actually work with a team out of Berlin. So the high-level description of my job is that I make all kinds of art for a few different games. I mainly work on Bingo Pop and Mahjong City Tours, and that can be anything from art for features for the game, so backgrounds and characters and sometimes icons and stuff like that, or promotional art that gets used in sales or in the App Store. My daily life, since I work with a team in Berlin, and this is going to sound not great to most people, but I'm an early bird, so I really like it, is that I start at 7 a.m. most days. I start at 6 a.m. some days if I want to leave early. And that means that I'm out of the office by 3 p.m., which is amazing. So most of my day, thankfully, and I love this, is actually just spent drawing. You know, sometimes it's finding references and putting together concepts and writing, but most of the time I've just got pen to tablet and I'm just drawing all day long. I've got meetings, obviously, and we talk about the direction for new features and the needs for particular assets in that. Each morning I have a couple of different syncs with the game team and the art team, but the vast majority of my day is just zoned in, listening to music, working on art for video games, which is amazing.
I want to know your origin story. How did you get into this work?
That's a very good question. I always wanted to be in this type of work. When I was, 3 years old, some of my earliest memories, my mom handed me this yellow crayon. And yellow, I don't know why I remember this crayon. It's probably the least efficient color for drawing on paper. You can barely see it, but I remember having this mustard yellow crayon with teeth marks in it, which I probably did, but it could have been anybody, I don't know. And just drawing little stick figures of mostly myself and my mom going on various adventures, or copying cartoons off the TV, like, I want to draw Simba, that kind of thing. So when I was really, really little, I wanted to be a fashion designer or an artist, something to do with drawing. And then I always still wanted to do that, but just personally, I thought it wasn't going to be viable because of what you see in the media and the culture. And some members of my family weren't super supportive. My mom always was. She said, if you want to be an artist, and I think you can do it, and it's going to be great. And her mother, Babushka, as we called her, I'm Slav background, she's not grandma, she's Bubba. And her and my grandfather, who I sadly never got to meet as he died a very long time ago now, they were both painters, actually, and we have their work all over our house, always have. So that's been a great source of inspiration, just knowing that creativity sort of ran in the family and you can do this, or you can at least have it as a very large part of your life. And that always stuck with me. But me personally, watching the media and listening to what was being discussed in school and all of that, I'm 7 years old and I'm going, I don't really think art is a viable career. So suddenly I'm thinking, I'm watching a lot of Law and Order. I don't want to be a police officer, but I could see myself being a detective or working for, the CSIS or something. So I had my secret agent phase, as all children do. And then when I was in grade 7, I really enjoyed math class, and my teacher, I was helping her out sometimes. I'd come in early because of some stuff that was going on in my life, and the school was helping us out. My mom would drop me off before she'd go to work. So I'd be volunteering. I'd be marking some quizzes for younger grades and that. And my teacher said, you might be a really good teacher. Maybe you could consider studying math at university and being a math professor. So then I went through my math professor phase. And by the time I got to high school, I was getting really interested in all of the sciences. And Bubba had, unfortunately, at that time, she'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's for some years, and her condition was progressing. So I was getting kind of interested in the medical field as well. I didn't want to be a doctor. I just knew that personally, that type of responsibility and that heartbreak from knowing that you're going to be losing people was too much for me. So I thought medical research, biochemistry. So then I had a couple years where it was like, I'm going to be a biochemist. And then I was taking physics classes, and I thought, okay, biochemistry is really cool, but maybe astronomy is a little cooler. So I want to be an astrophysicist now. And that stuck for a couple years. I applied to 3 different schools for astrophysics: Waterloo, McMaster, U of T. I got offer letters from all of them. I was going, oh my God, this is great. How naive I was. So I ended up picking U of T, and I went to U of T for astrophysics for 3.5 weeks, and I hated it. And I'm sure U of T is a great school. I have friends that went to U of T. One of my best friends went to U of T, got their undergrad there, did a double master's. They're doing great, but it was not for me. The way the breadth requirements were and everything, and the commute was killing me. I had classes till 9:30 at night. I'm a homebody. I was homesick, and I'm going, I don't like this. I'm not having a good time. And I really had to do some introspection and think, am I doing this because it's what I really want to do? Or am I doing it because I feel like I have to prove something and do the hardest thing? And I just picked a field that was really interesting, but also because I kind of wanted to get a doctorate and be fancy. And that was part of it. And there's a little bit of shame associated with recognizing that about myself, that it was partially hubris that led me to the field of study that I had initially, but I was also 17, and I don't think anyone can really be said to have a 100% success rate trying to decide their future at 17. So I quit before I had to worry about a transcript or anything, or thinking like, what's a transfer going to look like? I thought, okay, I came home and I was crying, and I was saying to my mom, what am I going to do? And she goes, Samantha, if you're not happy, just quit. Take some time. Figure out what you want to do. It's okay. You can quit. And I'm going, I can't be a dropout. She goes, you're not a dropout. It's okay to quit. Sometimes quitting is good. If you know you don't want to do something, you should quit and push your life to where you actually want it to be. So I quit. And we went up in the forest for a weekend at a hotel up in the forest in Northern Ontario. And I did some soul searching. And that year was interesting. I bought a violin, which I can't really play, but it was fun. I play the piano. So I was just noodling with some different instruments. I made some mods for Skyrim. I worked on programming a little bit because I had to take a programming course as an elective at U of T. I know I've been talking for a while. This is getting to game art, I swear. So I was doing a lot that year, but basically right after I'd quit. I can't remember if it was before or after the weekend when I went up to the forest, be one with the trees. But my mom actually had a mailer from UOIT. Do people still say mailer? For any Gen Alpha kids listening, a mailer is this thing that people used to get delivered to their house, or a box outside on the street near their house, where this person in a uniform comes up and they put a bunch of paper into it. And depending on which house you live in, you go and you get the paper out, and it's usually people trying to sell you insurance. So we had this mailer, this flyer from UOIT, Ontario Tech University, as it's now called, advertising some different programs, and the game development program was mentioned. And my mom left it on the coffee table, and she said, hey, no pressure, but I know you wanted to apply for university again this year, so this one maybe could be cool. It's close by, so you won't have to worry about the commute and being away from home so much. And I know you like programming now because you've been doing a lot of programming, and I know you still like art. Maybe game development could combine a little bit of everything. And I went, how did I never think of this? So I applied, and I very stupidly put all of my eggs in one basket and only applied to that. And then I did not hear back. And I went to the open house in, I think it was March, and I was speaking to a couple of profs, and I was going, oh, well, I kind of thought maybe I'd get early acceptance with my average because it was above the cutoff, but I don't know if it's a problem. I wrote the letter explaining why I took a gap year, and they're going, well, what's your average? And I told them my average, and they said, okay, you should have gotten a letter by now. We will check this out. It turns out the school had lost my application. They did not have my transcript, and the deadline was fast approaching. So drove to the high school. It's like, I need a copy of my transcript now. Got the paper copy of the transcript, drove to the university to the registrar's office and went, okay, I think one of the profs sent you an email about this. I'm the student whose application got lost. Here's my transcript. The next day I got an acceptance email. So I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, I can deal with beating myself up and thinking, oh, drop out for a year. But if I take 2 years to figure myself out, I'm just going to hate myself. So, I'm set. So that was that. And to be clear, I was the type of person in high school based on the climate and everything where I'm thinking, oh, gap year, like, oh, this is a mark on my record or something. I think it's a really good idea. I think obviously it depends on where you are. I was in a very privileged position where my mom had saved up for my university and that. So I didn't have to jump into working full time that year or anything to make ends meet. So it's definitely not something that everyone can do. But I think that taking that year, whether you're going to work part-time or whether you're in a position where you actually can just kind of think, process, create, travel even potentially, I think that's really good. I think I matured a lot in that space. And when I went in the next year to undergrad, I was way better equipped to deal with it as a result and all the hardship that came because it didn't matter. U of T has this reputation for being a really fancy, difficult school. Ontario Tech was just as difficult. There was a lot of work. It was a different type of difficult. It was different subjects, but it was a lot. And there were, a few times there, way more than a few, where I'd be up until 3 a.m. crying my eyes out because I had so much to do and the material was difficult and I was pushing myself to get ahead and make sure that we had the best project and that we'd be able to get the best grades and all of that. And it was a lot, but having that year to gain perspective, I think helped me really stay committed and knowing that I was in maybe not the right direction, but a much better direction. Because at the time, I wasn't actually specializing in art, even though secretly I still always had that, oh, but I want to be an artist. And I was still spending every spare minute that I had, not that there were many, working on my art. So I was actually leaning into the tech side of things, the programming side of things, and that continued throughout undergrad. I ended up doing a minor in game programming. So when I finished undergrad, I was working with a couple of guys that are to this day dear friends, Josh and Owen. I doubt they're going to see this, but I'll link it to them. Maybe they'll listen to it. Shout out. They were amazing people, and we had built a project together. We showed it at PAX. We were thinking about going the entrepreneurship Kickstarter route, and I still wonder what life would have been like if we had gone that way. I still am really kind of misty-eyed thinking about that sometimes, and I wish that we had had more time and that I had had more time to really think and settle and be able to handle multiple things at once. But I knew at the time that I wanted to do grad school and that it was all becoming too much. And this idea of, applying for Canadian Media Fund and programming for the game and doing more business side of stuff and dealing with the government at the same time as grad school and trying to do a master's on like the regular timeline was too much. So ultimately I ended up focusing on grad school. That summer I TA'd a course for the first time because throughout undergrad I'd been doing research assistant work, but never teaching. And I really liked being a TA. So I thought, great, maybe I'll want to get into teaching. So I did some more TA work during the first year of my master's. The second year of my master's, I started doing sessional work and actually leading classes, which was a lot of fun. I taught game design for the first time in 2019, I want to say. And it was a blast. I loved being up at the front of the room. It was showmanship and talking to the students. And I got to work in, a little bit of art and creativity into the lectures and kind of deciding what I'm going to talk about and shaping how the lessons are going to go. It was cool. It's power and it's responsibility, but it's creativity and it's mentorship. And it was a lot of fun. And then 2020 happened, and 2020 was a year that was not a lot of fun. And I finished my master's. I was the school's first online thesis defense, and that was great. And then I was thinking, what do I do now? And something just snapped about being inside and not being able to teach in person and just being trapped. And I was talking to Josh, actually, that one of the friends I was working with, and he said, have you ever considered doing art commissions? And I said, I'm not good enough to do art commissions. Are you nuts? I can't have people pay me for, what kind of idiot's going to pay me for my work? It's so bad. And Josh goes, first of all, stop. Your work is really good. And I still don't think my work is any good, but he said, I have a friend that wants to commission you. I just shared some of your work in the server that I'm in because I thought a couple of things you did were really cool. And I was like, hey, look what my friend made. And this friend of his wanted to commission me to do a portrait of his character. So I went, I can do this. This is something I can do. So I started doing commissions, and it was a lot of paintings of people's animal characters and stuff, and D&D characters and pet portraits. It's kind of a bit of a meme in the artist community from the fringe that I'm on, that when you do commissions, like half of it is pet portraits. But I love drawing animals, so it was a lot of fun for me. And then I was still teaching. I was still doing academic contracts, but I now had this side thing where I was doing art commissions, and I was thinking, okay, this is cool. And I'm actually, I'm making some real money on the side here now, $100 here, $100 there. Before you know it, I've got a few $1,000s rolling in just from art on the side of this other contract. And I'm going, is this viable? Maybe at some point, I don't know. And my mom goes, you can always just quit the school and try and make artwork full time. And I'm like, why are you always so encouraging? Stop it. It's frightening that someone could possibly believe in me this much. After about a year of doing commissions, I did exactly that. It was terrifying. And I quit. Well, I didn't quit, but I let my contract run out, and I went, I'm going to try and do art full time. And then, I heard good things, and I also heard bad things about it just being scary and about it being really hard. I had one person tell me, like, you're going to be stuck at that amateur level unless you go to school for another 4 years or something. And I thought, that's terrifying. And I really don't like being in school. I like teaching, but I don't really like being in school. I love learning, but the education system of being in school makes me sad. So no, I don't want to do that. So I kept flying by the seat of my pants and eventually got a commercial contract to work on a Dungeons and Dragons supplement, which was super fun. Shout out to Dave Panfilo. I don't actually know how to pronounce his last name properly, but he was my first commercial contract, and that was amazing. I got to draw fantasy food and monsters and stuff, and I was going, okay, I can at least do some professional work. And then I did a couple other art pieces for another game dev that I knew tangentially through a community who was working on a game series that I love, David Galindo of Vertigo Games. They make the Cook Serve Delicious series, and I did a couple pieces for him, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm doing some work for the guy that makes my favorite series of indie games. This is amazing. And I did some fan art for Hades by Supergiant Games. I made these tarot cards, and they have this wonderful policy that if you're an artist and you like the game, if you make a limited version of the thing that you created that's your original work, even if it's their IP, you can sell it. So I had them printed in corners, and my mom and I sat in the family room tying ribbons around tarot decks for a few days, and I sold those on Etsy. And then, just like every artist in 2021, I got roped into an NFT project at some point. It ended up ending well. I say that there was some regrettable stuff involved, but I personally verified, because I took it out of my own earnings because I did not trust what was going on, that we ended up making a really nice donation to the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Fund. So as much as I have to say about crypto and NFTs, that particular project worked out well. And then, because I was terrified and I thought, I'm never going to make a living full-time doing this for some reason, I thought that still, I had submitted dozens of full-time job applications at this point and heard exactly zero. So I thought maybe it can always just be a side gig, but it's still something. So I went running back to the school and I taught another course. And then in about the last week of that, I heard back from Jam City, which is where I work now. And they said, hey, we looked at your portfolio. Do you want to have a chat with us? And I'm thinking, I applied for this job 6 months ago. I thought for sure you guys just desk rejected me and didn't send an email. But yeah, I talked to them and I did a test, and I talked to them some more, and I talked to some of the team who have now become very good friends, very dear friends to me. And I ended up getting to Jam City and finally being an artist full time. And at the same time, the first year I was working there, I had just gotten a long-term freelance gig with Vertigo Gaming to work on the Cook Serve series as well. So I had 2 jobs for my first year, and I didn't sleep, but it was wonderful. And that is how I became an artist, and it has been 20 minutes. I am so sorry.
I love that origin story. Like, how do you not have your own podcast, Samantha?
My mother and I joke about that, actually. Our way of self-amusement in line at stores is just to have a just loud enough that the people next to us can hear it conversation, just riddled with jokes and just talking about something really inane. And then when we get the side-eyed glances, we're like, check out our podcast. We don't actually have one, but we just like doing it because we're like that.
Now, Pejman is scared to ask the next question in case like it's in depth.
It's another 20 minutes, yeah.
Again, on reflection, I was wondering, because I know Samantha for quite a while now, I was like, what sort of question I can ask her? But now I have so many questions. I wrote like 10 questions to ask you. So there are two questions that I'm actually very curious to hear and how you manage to do that. And the two topics are, again, as I know you and I work with you for a while. So you have this, I would say, unique ability to do hard work, but not only hard work on a big sprint, but hard work consistently for weeks or months. And not only hard work, but you deliver really high quality work as an output. But also, more importantly, you are not doing hard work, high quality in one domain. Like, you're not a really good programmer, but you are a really good programmer and really good artist and really good designer and really good writer. So how do you do that? Like, what's the secret of being able to do such a high quality work in so many different domains?
Let me just recover from the magnitude of that compliment for a second. Thank you. It comes down to being interested in it and having a love for it on some level. I think really because I left U of T. You know, it's not that I was interested in everything that I was doing there, but I couldn't love it because of the circumstances it was creating in my life. So I think it comes down to anything that I'm able to not only be interested in, but kind of nurture a passion and a love for that's really deep, where I really care, not necessarily about the task, but about the type of work. And I don't say that to trivialize it, but you know, sometimes you're working on a mobile game. Sometimes there's going to be a task that's a little silly that needs to get done quickly, that needs to reuse a bunch of assets. And we're going, okay, we need this now. We need to get this on the App Store. It's got to look great. But at the back, what the players see is polished and cool and slick. And at the back, it's an artist running around all day going on Google Drive going, what can I hack together from other features? And this is held together with duct tape. And just outside the frame that's cropped for the App Store, you know, it's like half an elbow and is just the dog doesn't have any legs and that kind of stuff. So sometimes the task itself is not always going to be super inspiring. But if it's helping me develop a skill that I care about, or if I can just say, you know, this is the type of work that I really, really enjoy, or I know this is leading to another task that is going to be really inspiring. Knowing that and having that passion, I just want to make everything perfect, right? I think also part of it is, I joke about this with my boss all the time and my other friends at work who are also artists, that it's a stereotype. And in many ways, it's a harmful stereotype. But in some ways, it's a true stereotype that artists and creative people, you know, we're all neurotic, we're all crazy, right? And we all have deep depression and self-loathing. And it is a harmful stereotype in many respects. But there is some truth to that. I do have a deep-seated loathing of myself in many respects. I'm happy with who I am as a person, but I think everything I make on some level is crap. So wanting to make the next thing less crap is really, really motivating. And the thing is, I always look at it after, and for a moment I can be like, I improved. And then my brain goes, but it's still horrible. And that just pushes me to keep going. And it sounds like it would be miserable. And I guess in some respects it is. But it's also just, it's inspiring because it means, you know, maybe one day I'll look at my work and just be happy with it. But knowing that I'm not, every single task, every single thing that I make presents an opportunity to become better. And more importantly, maybe becoming better isn't the right word, but to learn something. And that is a really, really good feeling. And as for loving learning, I know I talk about my family a lot, but I credit my mom for that, and Bubba, and being in that environment. When I was little, whenever I asked a question, I never got because I said so, or you'll understand when you're older, or we don't have time for that. And again, I know some of that is coming from a position of privilege where if you have the time and if you're in an environment where you have that time, that's amazing. But my mom, she, bless her heart, somehow found a way to make that time and use that time And if I was just say, what kind of bird is that? She'd go, I don't know. Let's find out. Or if I was reading a book, I go, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? What does this word mean? It used to drive my father nuts on road trips because I would have a stack of books in the back, and I liked reading stuff that was, above my grade level or whatever, right? Because I knew that if there was a word that I didn't know, I would ask my mom and she would know 999 times out of whatever. And if she didn't know, she would find out. And we didn't have computers or a smartphone. She would get the dictionary. And I don't think I'm misremembering this, that sometimes she would bring the dictionary with us because she knew I was going to ask, and she was always ready. So I just, when you're really little, I think, and you're just naturally curious, if you're able to really foster that, then it comes naturally later in life. And I think that life can beat you down, and sometimes you can lose that depending on where you are in your life or maybe how you grew up in that. If you feel like that's something that's maybe not as strong within yourself, I think it's something that you can build and develop just by finding the subject that's the most interesting to you and asking yourself, what don't I know about this? Or what's my favorite part of this? How can I find out more about that? Just look up the most obscure things about something that really interests you, and finding something to be curious about. As you satiate that curiosity, I think that will naturally make you more curious about other things. And the more curious you are, the easier it is to want to learn about things. And if you want to learn about things, learning about them will make you happy. And if learning makes you happy, then you're always going to want to make the next thing you do better because you'll get to learn something by doing that. And I think that's what, at least for me, motivates me to work hard and try and get better at a lot of different skills and always be wanting to make things and see places and maybe not meet people because I'm scared and an introvert, but I do like meeting people, in small doses. But yeah, that's what it is for me, I think, is finding a way to love learning, or if you already do love learning, just picking something that you're interested in and going from there.
Awesome.
I want to poke at a flip side of your career. It's related to being a freelancer, right? You're an introvert, you're creative, and all of a sudden you have to do a business hustle, right? Or figure out, where do I find commissions? How do I support myself? How do I find clients? How do I figure out how much to charge? How did you even navigate that? That seemed like such a big, scary area, particularly for young people who are creative minded.
It was. I think part of it, honestly, I had some experience with that from undergrad because when I was working with Josh and Owen, we wanted to do the incubator credit. So we all kind of had to figure out, how do we talk to the government? How do we set up a corporation? How do we write a shareholders agreement? So figuring all of that out, it wasn't the same thing as being a freelancer, but it was a foot in the door about all the quote unquote boring stuff, right? And business for me is not something I'm super passionate about. It is something that I find interesting, and I can see how people get really passionate about it. But for me, yeah, it was almost a necessary evil. I think part of what kept me going there was that to find out what you should charge and to reach people, you have to share your work. And surprisingly, there was the occasional, I actually got this a couple times. I read it, that character's boobs should be bigger. Like, you get some of that. But for me, and again, mileage will probably vary a lot, people on the internet were really nice and really encouraging. And I probably just got lucky, but whenever I shared my stuff, it was very rare that there would be any kind of negative comment. Sometimes there'd be a constructive comment, which is great, but a lot of it would just be praise. And that is motivating. And it's something that, if I know I have to share my work to get it to more people, to find more clients, if I know that when I put something out there, someone's going to look at it and like it. And sometimes they're going to like it enough to leave a comment or a little heart or whatever on it. And I know that for every person that's leaving a comment, I'm a lurker on the internet. I don't usually comment on things. So probably a few other people saw it and liked it. And maybe it brightened their day for a bit. And that helped keep me going in terms of sharing on social media. I don't actually really do that anymore, partially because I haven't in a while done basically a full, complete personal illustration that I'd want to post online. I still do personal work. I still do a lot of sketches. I've actually been working on a D&D campaign. Probably none of my friends are going to hear this. If you are, the suckers, I'm making the next D&D campaign, surprise. And I've been sketching a few things for that. And that's been a lot of fun. It was about knowing that part of that process was going to be sharing the work with other people, and that provided some validation. That kind of gave some extra motivation to figuring out, okay, how do I put an invoice together? how am I going to find people? How do I make a website? I used Adobe Portfolio for that in case anyone's listening to this who's an artist and wants to. It's overpriced, but if you're paying for Photoshop anyways, you might as well. And their website builder is not super fully featured, but it's good enough. It was good enough to build me a portfolio that got me a job. So I give it a tepid recommendation in our current hellscape of an economy. What, 2 very regrettably capitalist thumbs up. Another thing that I forgot to mention about the journey, and I should mention this because I want to give her a shout out too. Believe it or not, I abridged the journey. One very important part of that was when I was in grad school, I don't know. Sometimes I think my mind would just occasionally flick me in the head and be like, hey, you want to be an artist, dummy? Like, we're still going to make that happen at some point. So I had this intrusive thought that's like, take an art class. And I mentioned it to my mom because of course I did. She goes, take an art class. And Ontario Tech shares campus with Durham College. So I walked into the Durham College registrar's office and I was like, 1 art class, please. And because Durham College is great, they were like, yeah, okay, why not? I mean, sure, you seem okay. You just pay us $300 and you can take a 12-week life drawing class. It's probably way more than that now because the economy is in shambles, but it was affordable when I did it for me. So I did it and it was amazing. And I took it for 2 semesters and I had this teacher, her name's Barbara Sue, and she's a Canadian artist. She recently did a residency in, I think, Newfoundland, and she was exhibiting some of her work at a show in Toronto over the summer, which I went to and I got to catch up with her. And she was fantastic. Just this really inspiring, encouraging person that, you know, a lot of the time, and I've been fortunate to have great teachers in my life, but a lot of the time, if a teacher is really focused on technique, they tend to be a bit harder, right? And analytical, and they criticize you in maybe not the nicest way. And then the teachers who are super nice and encouraging sometimes don't drill down into technique and the hard side of things as you would like them to. And Barbara really just went into both. I don't know how she did it, but the class, I got so much better at drawing in such a short amount of time. And she was also just always super encouraging and understanding and gave helpful advice that was constructive and useful, but also encouraging and didn't make you feel like you did anything wrong, just made you feel like this is how I can learn even better. And her door was always open for conversations and stuff like that. So that was also a really key step in just making me feel like I could do more than I thought I could, and also developing a lot of the technique that I had been lacking as someone that had just been self-taught practicing where I could, never done life drawing before, had some good books, but that can get you far. But it definitely accelerated me to have in-person instruction on that as well. So that was another thing. I'm going to stop talking now briefly.
I'm going to follow up with the next question from the 2 questions I want to ask you. So one thing that makes, like I realized from, again, working with you was you are also very, let's call it maybe comfortable to say no, maybe to project that you are not interested in, which is, again, from someone that collaborates with you is very reassuring, because that means I don't hesitate to tell you if there is a project. And then that also means if you say yes, you're gonna, again, do a high quality work. Example is like the book we created together. So where is that either confident or being comfortable to say no to things that you don't want to do? How do you describe what's the underlying characteristic, let's say?
I think it comes with experience, and that's such a cop-out answer. And I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off there. I thought that connection on mine. That's what I'm going to blame. I'm just someone that I'm always like, I don't want someone to think I'm not interested, so I'm going to jump in and speak immediately so they know that I'm interested. And then I also am really bad at telling when people are done speaking. So I'm a chronic interrupter. Anyways, I have always had a problem with not saying no to things. I think if you ask my mom and my partner, they'd be like, Samantha doesn't know how to say no to things, and it's a chronic problem with her. But I am getting better. I think even quitting U of T was like the first time I ever said no to anything. And that was, in some ways, the first time is the hardest. I still struggle with that sometimes, but I think it's challenging because a lot of the time, if I'm saying no to something, it's still something that I'm interested in, at least in part. And I just have to say no for a practical reason. I try these days a lot of the time to just think about what I'd need to sacrifice to take on more work than I have or more work than I need to, be secure and comfortable and know that the bills are getting paid and that. Because if I think, okay, this is going to mean that I can't go hiking with my mom for the next couple months, or this is going to mean that I'm going to need to be rushing through dinner with my partner and I'm not going to be able to have as many of these nights where I'm spending 4 hours making some elaborate pasta dish because I like to do that. And I'm thinking, is the money, is the experience and the career input really worth that? And for me, I'm at a point in my life where I've realized that family is the most important thing to me. So even though I'm still super driven and focused on my career, my family and my friends are they're always going to be the most important thing to me. And when I think about what is my perspective going to be when I'm older, am I going to regret not doing the extra project, or am I going to regret that time that I couldn't go hiking? And I said, no, I'm too busy. Like I gotta stay in this weekend and I gotta be in the office. So like, sorry, but don't bother me. And I think the second thing would make me really sad. So that's why I've tried to say no to more things. But I also want to point out that for a lot of people, especially artists, they don't have that luxury. Art is a field that is traditionally and still is in many respects underpaid. I'm very lucky to be at a full-time position at a company where, even though the economy is difficult and of course, everyone wishes their salary was higher, I can afford to say no to some freelance work and know that I'm still going to be able to go to the dentist because I have health insurance and pay the bills and save money for retirement and that. But a lot of artists aren't in that position. So I think maybe some people, once they do get into a position where they can be comfortable, there's also that fact of like, how do I get out of the mode where I did have to say yes to everything at one point to make sure that everything was going to be covered and I'd be able to have enough experience to get a full-time job. So part of it is transitioning out of that. And I think with time and experience, you learn how. Another thing, get good advice from friends, from mentors, from loved ones. Seek out good advice about what you should and shouldn't be taking on. I credit Pejman a lot with helping me develop my diplomatic skills and knowing how to navigate a bureaucracy, whether it's academia or whether it's a company. Because when I started out, I was just go-getter, and I'm still a very abrasive person, but I had way more rough edges when I was in early undergrad, and Pejman taught me a lot. He wasn't the only one, of course, but he was the person I worked with the most at university, and he's, my predominant academic mentor figure. So he helped me navigate that a lot at the university, and I was able to carry a lot of that with me into the industry and my professional life. And I think that's continued to help shape just kind of my ability to know how I want to shape my career going forward and which projects I want to take on and knowing which personal projects I want to prioritize as well.
I'm curious as to what the major challenges you think there are for artists now who want to do games work, and what sort of advice do you give to people who want to do arts and games? And I know the larger context here is, if you're familiar with games work, a lot of artists sitting next to programmers will be paid, 60% what that programmer will be paid. and a lot of the status ascribed to somebody's role or power ascribed to somebody's role changes according to whether they are a programmer or an artist. It's what do you think about that? And what do you tell aspiring artists about that sort of issue, and how do we work at changing that issue?
Okay, I'll break that down into two parts. First, about getting into the industry, getting into the field, and secondly, about the dichotomy between art and programming or any discipline in game dev. There's a lot of hierarchy where there really shouldn't be. But as for getting into art, the path I took was really unique. And I think that honestly, a big part of why I got a second look, because there's a lot of really talented artists out there. And honestly, my technical art skills are probably the weakest component of me as an employee. I'm not saying I'm horrible at art, though personally I always look at my work that way, but I think a big part of why they took a second look at me was because I had the masters, because I had game engine programming experience on my resume and some academic publications, and that they went, oh, this person's maybe well-rounded, maybe serving as a bridge to communicate between disciplines. So I think if you have that ability to foster another skill in yourself. I think being multidisciplinary in game dev is really important. Even though those types of jobs that are truly multidisciplinary, you can say they exist at big companies. You can be a technical artist, but technical art, it's not really half programming and half art. It's a separate thing. It's its own thing. And you need some of both to understand, but it's its own set of skills. So even though those types of jobs that truly are multidisciplinary, I think only really exist at smaller companies and in the indie space, or if you're a solo game dev, having other skills helps you communicate with other teams. And interdisciplinary communication is extremely important. And it's pretty common for artists in general to not really know about programming, source control, that type of thing. Not painting with a broad brush here. Obviously, there's plenty of artists that do. But if you're one of those artists that does have some experience on the programming or scripting side of things, or integrating assets into a game engine, even if you're not writing code yourself, that's all something that's important, I think, to put at the forefront when you're applying for a job, because then you'll be seen as someone that can help form a bridge between teams. And that can help you stand out, potentially even more so than having a really amazing, perfect portfolio. It was easier for me, especially with the path that I had taken, to have a bit more of a multidisciplinary background and to discuss those other skills and how they could be applied to the job than it was to just, magically gain 5 more years of art experience and level up my technical skills 1,000 times overnight when I'm trying to get a job. So I think that would be my key piece of advice for applying. As for the hierarchy between subjects, that is a very loaded subject. I will say I think it's gotten better, because I've heard stories from people who've worked longer in the industry that in many companies, QA used to be treated really, really poorly. It's a very important part of the process, but anyone that worked in QA or testing or customer support kind of used to get, pushed to the side. You're not really making the game. Like, yes, they are. And that's gotten better. It's not a lot better at some companies. I don't want to speak for people who work in QA because I haven't worked in QA myself, but from what I've heard from other people that work in those disciplines, it has gotten better. Though unfortunately, I think sometimes QA is still seen as only a stepping stone to other disciplines. But I think any discipline can be seen as a stepping stone to another. I have a friend who's no longer technically an artist, who is now, she still creates art for the game, but she's a UX designer now. And that's, a bridge from art to UX, where she's still doing art, but she's also doing this other very important thing now. So art can also be a bridge. Programming can be a bridge. You have people who are designers who become programmers, or sometimes vice versa, and that type of thing. And I think recognizing the fact that there is so much, in a way, it's strange because there's a ton of separate disciplines that have so many different skills that are completely different from each other. But in another sense, there's so much overlap in terms of the motivation and the creativity that anyone in the games industry has, that I think it's really mushy to say this, but understanding more of what we have in common, that we all care about making a good experience, that we're all creative, that we all want to see our mark on the thing we're making, can maybe help in terms of seeing that kind of equality between professions. Now, as for pay equality, I have the probably not that hot take, or at least not as hot as it used to be, that yes, different disciplines should basically be paid the same at the same level, because you're doing the same amount of labor. And it's so ridiculous to say, well, the programming matters a lot more than the art. It matters exactly this much more. It matters $40,000 a year more than the art. And that's just that, because, you had to pay more to go to school. Have you looked at the tuition for art schools, especially in the States? No, everyone had to pay a lot of money for their qualifications, or if they're self-taught, they had to work and go through school maybe for something else, or just work and support themselves to get to the point where they can be here. Like, let's not make that argument, because I hear that used sometimes. It's not a good argument. As for trying to figure out exactly what part of a game is yielding more of the revenue, I also think that's a fallacy. If you don't have programmers, then you're going to have a slideshow of pretty art. No one's going to want to play that. If you don't have artists, you're going to have a bunch of cubes moving around on screen. And unless there are cubes that were really well put together and styled and interesting shaders done by, an art team, then nobody's going to want to play that either. So you need everyone. And I don't think it makes sense to have that pay disparity. I wish more companies would realize that. Unfortunately, I think that's the way the industry is right now. I think that's going to take a long time to change. And I recognize that it's difficult to change too, because where that can change tangibly, I think, is in the indie space to begin with. And as far as I know, there are studios that, have more of that pay equality. And obviously not everyone's going to make the same. It's based on seniority and experience and exactly what you bring to the table in that, but at least no pay discrepancy between disciplines. But then it's tough because either, let's say the baseline rate for an artist is 60,000 and the baseline rate for a programmer is 100,000. Good luck making that your first couple years in the industry, no matter what discipline you're in. But you get what I'm saying. If you bring art up to 100, suddenly your budget is higher. And especially if you're an indie, that's really difficult. But if you try and equalize them so that they're both making 80, suddenly a programmer is going to say to you, well, why am I going to come work for you when I'm a programmer that could have a much easier time finding a job than an artist, for example, at a company, not necessarily in the games industry, maybe somewhere else, and I could be making more. So, I think it's a really challenging problem to solve. I think that some change can start at the indie level. I think that the best change that could happen, which will also take a very long time, is unionization. I think that game dev disciplines very much need to be unionized in a similar fashion to the film industry. I think that's also something that's very difficult. It's not a good time to form a union right now. I mean, I think it's a great time to form a union, but you know what I mean? The climate is not really friendly to forming unions right now. So I think that ultimately unionization and changes at the smaller studio level can help push the industry forward, but that's going to take time.
Can I ask you one more, maybe hot take question, maybe not?
Oh yeah.
What are you excited about most with new tools for artists that use LLM?
Okay. Well, LLM, specifically large language models, oh my God. Okay. Pejman knows. He's like, oh, she's going to get started. I have a huge problem with generative AI models because they're trained on data without permission and they're being used for commercial purposes. And I find that unethical. I am not someone who's just broad strokes anti AI because it's not art and it's blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of the stuff that gets pushed out by large corporations and they're going, here, consumer, enjoy content. It is art. You will say that it is art. That's not art. But if someone's using it in a thoughtful way, as a technology, I don't have a problem with it. As Pejman knows, I did a fair bit of noodling with AI in my day. My master's degree was in a system that used AI. It was an expert system, not machine learning, but to evaluate level design. And I did a few machine learning projects in my time as well, generating music, generating sprites for Terraria. But that was in an academic, non-commercial context. And I had a personal motivation for it and a curiosity. And I think that makes a difference. So when I see these big tools that are trained on, for example, the Lion data set, which was created for academic purposes, at least at its inception, and is now being used by commercial firms getting millions or billions of dollars in venture funding to generate art that a lot of times people will type in a famous artist, their style, and they'll say, spit this out. And it's not the case that the model inside is patching together pieces of images directly. Some people do say that. So that's not the case. That's an inaccurate representation of the technology. But personally, ethically, it's equivalent to doing that from an ethics standpoint for me. So I am honestly very apprehensive about it. I wish that the law offered better protections for this. It feels ridiculous because the thing is that you can't ask it to make a Disney character without Disney suing you, right? But Disney already has that protection. Any large company has that protection that they can say to anyone that tries to draw Mickey Mouse or whatever, just using Disney as the example because they own everything. They're going to say, take it down. Nintendo's another one that's very notable for being litigious in that regard. They already have that protection and they're protected against AI models by that. But because the people that this is arguably harming the most are the laborers and the independent artists, when they go to the court and say, hey, this is awful. And yes, it's not technically copying line for line, but are we really going to say that this is the same thing as a human being learning from and taking a ton of time to get inspired by others' work and to incorporate elements from things that you've seen, but without copying it to create new works? Are we really going to say that's the same thing? And the court's response is yes. I think there's a huge problem there. And personally, I do not use generative AI tools unless it's for making a meme and a joke that will not leave my friend circle, because it's like, this is the only thing that I find it ethically acceptable to use it for. If I was going to use the technology, I would want it to be trained on my work, or I would want it to be for an academic context. And even at that, I still am apprehensive about it, because everyone makes fun of the Luddites, but I think in a society where we don't have a way for people to retrain, or for people whose jobs get replaced to just say, go on universal basic income and continue contributing to their community in the way they personally want, I don't think it's okay to just replace a bunch of jobs. And I think there's a lot that can be said about the fact that we're having this conversation now, and that this conversation was not so prevalent when it was so-called blue collar jobs that were more in danger of being replaced. But I don't think that it invalidates the conversation as a whole. And I think that we need to use this opportunity where more people are talking about it to have a better look at the fact that when any type of human labor is being replaced, that those people need to be compensated, and that maybe saying just retrain and do something else, that's not always reasonable, I don't think. And in terms of personal feelings as well, art is not a job that I think pretty much anyone gets into for the money or because they have to. This is a job that's coveted. This is a job that people want, that people dream of. And I say that as someone that wanted to be an artist for, 25 years before I was doing it full time. Why Silicon Valley tech bros? Why can't we have nice things? Why do you want to get rid of the jobs that people love so much? Like, I know you're just going for the money wherever you can see it, but really you had to do this? Like, what? Screw you guys. Like, what are you? Go back home and whine Twitter, Elon. Like, stop coming for my art jobs. Cut it out. So yeah, that's what I think of AI. I don't like it. I find the technology fascinating, but I think how it's being used in society is absolutely reprehensible. And that's not even getting into ingrained bias in models or potential safety concerns, especially in other fields. Just, I could rant about it all day. There could be a podcast of its own, just with 3 hours dedicated to each individual bullet point of why this is bad.
Maybe we do another, episode on AI, but I know we are coming
I can just record myself screaming at a cloud for a couple hours. You could use a couple clips from that.
I know we are coming up to 1 hour mark, and maybe on a concluding question, one thing I wanted to get your comments on. So I talked to many students who had you as a prof, and they kind of follow you and know your work, and you've been such an inspiration for them. They usually, like, one of them actually asked what they want to do. They were like, oh, they want to do what Samantha is doing. So what is your recommendation? And we think that some of the students going to be our audience for this podcast. So if there are students in their year 1, year 2 in the game development, they might be interested in art. They might be interested in just getting to be in the industry, become a game developer. What would be your recommendation for them? What should they do to be like you, basically?
Thank you. Okay. Well, the thing is, with me, I think if I had been honest with myself about what I wanted to do and actually gone for it, I probably could have been smarter about getting to where I got to in terms of efficiency, in terms of objectivity. But I wouldn't actually change anything. And not just, obviously, the primary reason is because of the people that I have in my life now, the friends that I have, my partner, all the people that I know and love, they wouldn't be in my life, many of them, if not for the path that I took. Even looking back at high school, one of my oldest friends, I wouldn't have met them if I'd been only taking art classes. So I wouldn't change anything about my life for that reason. But also I wouldn't change anything because even though I wish my technical skills at art were better, and I'm always beating myself up over it, I have a feeling I would still be doing that even if I was, to me now, if I could look at something that I love and it's amazing, I'm like, oh my God, how do they do that? Even if I was making that, I would probably still find a way to go, you suck. And I wouldn't have all of these other things that I've learned about. I wouldn't have the just foundational basics of science that I learned in high school that I still find really interesting, that is still something that I, like to read about sometimes or listen to a documentary about or something like that. I wouldn't have the programming foundation. I wouldn't have the writing experience. I wouldn't have the research and the teaching experience. And all of that not only helped me get my job, but also just has made me feel like my life is fuller. So I like that I did all of that. But if I had only done what I should have done, what I thought based on what I was hearing from teachers and peers and that, I wouldn't be an artist, especially because it was something I always kept to myself in a lot of regards. It was just something reserved for my close friends and family that knew. So if I hadn't also gone, well, no, this is what I really want to do, I'm going to focus on this now, then I also wouldn't want to be where I am. So I would say get a breadth of experiences and find a lot of different things that you're interested in. But at your core, never forget, never let go of the thing you're truly passionate about. Even if it's something that for whatever reason in your life, whether it's academics, whether it's a hardship, whether it's a practical thing where you go, I'm just not in a position where I have the ability to go for the thing that I really want right now. Keep it close to your heart and try and find time for it and hold on to that. And then if you find yourself at a point where you can put more of yourself into it, where you can pursue it either as a side gig or just say, okay, I have some savings, I'm going to quit. I'm going to focus on this thing. I'm going to apply for a job in this career. I'm going to try and make a go of it on my own as a business or what have you. Know that if you find that opportunity, you should take it and just don't get discouraged too. I know that a big theme of this podcast is kind of diversity and inclusion. And I'd be lying if I said, being as someone that's femme presenting or what have you. I call myself genderqueer technically, but being someone that's perceived as just woman as the label, you do take some flack for that sometimes. We live in that world, and I've seen friends get marginalized for other reasons. Being in the queer community is hard sometimes. I'm fortunate that with the people I'm surrounded with, it's not, but being racialized, that compounds with it obviously. But when you have a moment, and this actually happened to me when you're an undergrad and there's a guest speaker that comes in and maybe they weren't vetted 100%. And they'll say, in my experience, women just don't work as hard. They're going to work 10, maybe 20 hours less a week. They're not going to put in more than 40 hours, and a man is. And I'm sitting there thinking, I have written 10,000 lines of code in the last 2 months. Really? And I got up and I walked out of that class. I wasn't the only one. And that was nice. So the girls just high-fiving in the hallway like, yeah, this is something. It's some kind of protest. And to the credit of the school, there was an apology email. They were like, we're going to vet people more carefully now. But moments like that are going to happen, and you will feel discouraged. Of course, you can't control that. But I think really consciously acknowledge that when things happen that are like that, it's not fair. It's not right. And even though you can't control feeling discouraged, especially in the moment by something like that, you can't let yourself become discouraged by it. So keeping that in mind, I think makes it easier to stay focused on your passion and hold on to it, even when sometimes the world is going to be the world and throw up unreasonable obstacles in your way. Like some obstacles are reasonable. Learning how to draw a human being and have it not look absolutely terrible is a reasonable obstacle. But getting women just don't work as hard, man, and knowing that some people are going to be thinking that in the hiring process, that's an unreasonable obstacle. And it's something that you're going to have to fight past. But I think having solidarity and acknowledging that can help you keep your passion. So to sum up the 3 pieces of advice, have a breadth of experiences. Don't let yourself become discouraged when discouraging things happen. And most importantly, keep that fire of whatever it is that you really want to do in yourself. And if you're not sure what that is yet, that's okay too. That's what the breadth of experience is about. It's about finding out what you want to do and having the guts to go for it in your life if you're fortunate enough to find an opportunity where you can go for it.
I mean, we all need you to give us like motivational pep talks.
Yeah, it's, chapter 1, fashion designer, chapter 2, secret agent, chapter 10, artist, chapter 11, life coach.
Are you suggesting you're going to write a new book?
I think I'm done writing books for the time being, Pejman. I would like to plug a free project that I recently released on Steam. It is a Stardew Valley themed mod for Cookie Clicker. I don't know why I made it. It's very silly. So yeah, I just realized, I'm on a podcast. I gotta plug something. So I'm gonna plug that. Go on Steam. It's free. It's silly.
I thought you were going to talk about the book.
Well, Pejman, you talk about the book every chance you get. It's a good book, but it's not free. Or is it? Students, message me. I'm not one to gatekeep learning. Wait, I winked, people who are listening to this and not seeing the video. I did a little wink there. But the Cookie Valley mod for Cookie Clicker is actually free. So, I'm gonna plug that.
The book is actually free for most of the students. I should add that.
Oh, yeah, right. The through the university has Pejman, students of Pejman listening to this, you probably already know this, but know that he is the one that is championing for you to have free access to learning materials so that you can have a more affordable time at university with access to quality educational materials. And I know that everything that I say sounds sarcastic and like a joke, but actually that's really, really cool of him. And you should appreciate him because he's great and he cares about your success.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for being here. I really enjoyed this conversation. As always, I think we should probably do another episode just to talk more. But
thank you for tolerating me.
This has been really fun. Jen, any concluding final words?
I mean, Samantha, it's been a pleasure and a delight. If you want to lurk or stalk Samantha, go to her website.
It's www.stahlke.art. So STAHLKE.ART. It's the coolest domain I could have asked for. And there you can see a bunch of, at this point now, what is kind of outdated work because I haven't been doing personal work in a while, but yeah, you can get some behind the scenes footage of the Cookie Valley Stardew themed Cookie Clicker mod if you just need that in your life.
You do. Everybody does. Thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been great.
Thank you for having me.
You can check out our website at www.changinggamedevlife.com for summary notes, a full transcript, and related resources that are mentioned in this episode. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our Substack page or follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We're very passionate about having these conversations with people who make the game industry better. Together, we can drive positive changes. If this episode resonated with you, make sure to share the podcast with your network and take a moment to rate us on whatever platform you use. Thank you.